taking on a new role,
Mm-hmm.
making a leap career-wise, and
Mm-hmm.
plugging myself into different communities of practice to try and figure out how to be a strong leader in the TESOL field. What does that look like? What does it look
Mm-hmm.
like to be a mentor?
Mm-hmm.
So that to me is exciting. Professional development is exciting. Challenges to me are also exciting.
That was our guest for today, Lina, talking about the exciting new challenges she took on when she started her new role as academic coordinator of an IEP department smack in the middle of a pandemic.
Talk about challenges. Yeah.
So far on this podcast, we've talked a lot about the challenges teachers face every day. We've even talked about some of the challenges for teachers during the pandemic.
That's episode 6.
But attention is due to administrators too, wouldn't you say, Shey?
Definitely.
Hello, and welcome to the Teacher Think-Aloud podcast, a podcast for reflective practice for teachers of English around the world. I'm your co-host, Anna.
And I'm Shey.
Let's learn a little about our guest, Lina.
My name is Lina Jurkunas. My pronouns are she, her. I'm currently the academic director of an IEP based in San Francisco. And prior to that, I was an ESL instructor in the classroom at the university level in Turkey, and prior to that, here in San Francisco.
And so, listeners, we're doing our first ever episode focused on the admin side of things. Lina is a crazy talented teacher, but she's shifted into this role of academic director of an IEP in the past year or two.
And just for the benefit of our non-US based listeners, IEP stands for Intensive English Program and is a very common staple of colleges and universities in the United States. IEPs are normally a somewhat independent part of the university where adult learners of all language and cultural backgrounds can come to work on boosting their English skills.
And often these classes will be a bridge to entering the university or college.
A bridge program.
Or they might just be there to achieve their goals in their lives in the US.
Right. Shey and I, and most teachers of adult learners in the US, have worked in or at least heard of IEPs. And you actually, Shey, you were the director of an IEP for a while, right?
Yeah, as I've mentioned in other episodes, I was kind of thrown into this role of director at the university I was at in Rhode Island very early in my career. And I'm proud to have lasted as long as I did. I think it was just over 3 years. Of course, with any leadership role, overseeing IEPs means a lot of moving parts. And then you slap a pandemic on top of that. Sheesh.
Right. But before we dive into what it was like to be the director of an IEP during the pandemic, you know what's coming, listeners. It's our icebreaker question.
If you were a Disney character, what sort of creature would be your sidekick?
Oh, my sidekick?
Yeah.
Not what I would be.
No. Extra
Well,
layer there.
I do like that. It's like level up. We just went straight to advanced.
No scaffolding here.
No scaffolding, just rapid fire. Okay. Okay, I'm going with my gut here. What is that character's name from Beauty and the Beast? The candle?
Lumiere.
I think Lumiere of sorts would be my sidekick. I like candlelight. He's quirky. He's boisterous. He has a very boisterous personality. I feel like I'd need somebody to keep that momentum going and match my energy level.
Yeah.
And plus, who doesn't want to be friends with a candelabra? So
Exactly.
Wow, that was a toughie, Anna. I think you're the one who came up with that one.
Yeah.
I have to know what possessed you to ask that question.
Yeah, well, I know Lina pretty well. She was an English language fellow the same year I was. And I've just seen how dynamic she is in the classroom and also just what a positive, down for anything human she is. I figured she would be the best person to answer this very obscure question.
Obscure, yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Anywho, let's get back to our topic here, though, because Lina had a very unique experience when she first started as director of the IEP she's at.
So you were telling me when we saw each other about becoming the director of this IEP during the pandemic and how challenging and exciting all of that was. So would you mind telling us a little bit about what it was like to jump in at that point in time?
Yeah, sure. You kind of hit the nail on the head. It was both very exciting and challenging all at the same time. So the role of academic director was a complete new role for me, shifting away from the classroom and into a leadership position. So that in and of itself is a challenge. But also the timing was an extreme challenge. I came in during the pandemic, not right at the start, but more toward the tail end at the end of 2021. And it was a time of unpredictable and unprecedented times, as we can all recall and relate to. Our IEP had, as most everybody had, shifted to 100% online instruction. And one of our biggest challenges was how do we get us to come back? And also, when do we come back? There were just so many questions that I either had to learn how to answer or that I just had to be brave enough to say, I don't know, because there were so many unknowns that we were facing.
Man, that quote really stands out to me. Wow. What Lina said, being brave enough to say, I don't know.
I wonder where the episode title came from, Shey.
Like they say, when you know, you know. Maybe I'm a little pushy.
No, I mean, I love it. It's really hard to say I don't know in any kind of situation, let alone the pandemic.
Yeah. And this was my experience as well. Actually, before I came along, the IEP director position didn't even exist. It was an extra assignment for a former professor. But when he left, I stepped in and advocated that a full-time position be created to oversee all intensive programming. So yeah, there were a lot of I don't knows being thrown around. I especially didn't know who to turn to for support.
I imagine, and one thing I think is important is we often think of communities of practice, professional learning communities for teachers. But Lina also emphasized how important it was for her to connect with other administrators during the pandemic to compare notes, share resources, figure out what the heck was going on.
For example, going to TESOL in Pittsburgh was helpful to connect with other people in administrative role, to be able to understand what particular challenges they were facing and what solutions they came up with. Connecting with other professional networks such as English USA and NAFSA and, the communities of practice through other orgs, TESOL, the English language program, to just see, where everybody's head was at. I mean, we were faced with so many different regulations that we had to dissect and interpret. And so many different IEPs were interpreting them in different ways. So I think that time, and it still is so critical to be connected with a professional network so we can look at the regulations together and ask, are you interpreting this the same way? Are you reading this that we have to return back to 100% in-person instruction in May or not? Is my understanding correct here? Because P.S., if you just call up DHS, they're not really going to give you the answer. So
wouldn't that be amazing?
You got to use your critical thinking.
Wow, yeah, that must have been very challenging.
So we wanted to know more about how this so-called return back was going.
Tell us a bit about how your IEP has changed since the pandemic started and thinking about the transition back to analog teaching. What's that been like?
We are still in transition to returning back to 100% in person. The timeline was March 2020, 100% online. And then I came in almost a year and a half later, September 2021. We were 100% online. And then about 6 months into it, we shifted to hybrid. and we did a 50-50 split. So there have been a lot of growing pains.
Sure.
We've had such a mix of reactions from the students. Some students were excited to come back and eager to be back in the classroom, and others, even just half the time coming in person was a hurdle for them for various reasons. I think some students move far away out of the immediate Bay Area, so just commuting to school was a hurdle. Others got really comfortable with the idea of online instruction and being cozy in their home, wrapping themselves in a blanket or just being comfortable. So that in and of itself, getting the students on board and really understanding that when you run an IEP that's responsible for students on F1 student visas, it's not an option. It's not an option. We can't just say, oh, we want to continue 100% online because you guys like it. It's you are required by federal law to attend in-person classes. So translating that to student-friendly language is not only translating that message, but also getting them on board with the idea. That was a big battle. I think the teachers were more into the idea of coming back to in-person instruction. I mean,
It's
you
more
guys are
comfortable.
teachers, you get it. We're
Yeah.
comfortable.
Yep.
We want to be face-to-face. We want to have that feeling of the classroom energy with everybody there. It's different, right? So I think the hesitancy from the teacher side was more, well, is it safe? How many students are going to be in the classroom at a time? What are our COVID protocols? And not to say that the students didn't care about that too, but I think our teaching team was more focused on the safety. So yeah, it's been a rocky road. I think, and I hope that I'm not alone. I think other people are truly ready to just be back 100% in person. So we can leave behind the idea of, oh, your camera's not turned on. Can you please turn on your camera? I would love to see you. You learn better if the whole song and dance.
That's really interesting that the students got so used to learning from home. I mean, I get it though. I know I really leaned into what I call my business on top, lounging on the bottom look.
With our kitties.
Pets everywhere, yes. And don't forget the snacks. Constant snacks.
But we also, Shey, you and I have talked quite a bit about how there are skills and habits we learned during the pandemic that we think shouldn't just be left to wither. So we asked Lina what she thinks we can take from the pandemic.
One of the positives here is I feel like when we were all forced to start teaching and learning on Zoom, there was this period of forced creativity.
Totally.
It's like we just had to figure it out and come up with creative solutions.
Just suck it up.
Just suck it up and just do it and think in a creative way. How am I going to translate what I used to do in person to Zoom? So for me, that creativity, I hope that stays. The idea of how can we do this differently? How can we do group work differently? How can we do pair work differently? Does everything have to be on a printed handout for our students, or can we start having some interaction on laptops, phones, iPads? Can we collaboratively type our ideas in a Google Doc when we're sitting together in the face-to-face classroom? So I know different people have different opinions of technology and cell phones in the classroom, but it's the idea of creativity, really. Thinking, how can we approach pedagogy and activities in a new light?
Yeah.
And Anna, you and I have talked about this a bit in the past, but sometimes teachers are reticent to learn these new tools, and especially when they're forced to do so. But then once they have, why would we just
drop it,
senselessly leave it behind? We've acquired all of these new tools for our tool belt. So how can we really capitalize on what we gained through this challenging period?
And of course, Lina conceded that using more tech tools in the classroom might not be every teacher's favorite idea, given how distracted students can be, especially by mobile phones. But
in the working world, when people are at their jobs, people are multitasking. They are we're on Slack, and then we're building a PowerPoint and then my best friend's texting me. It's kind of the world we live in. So I wouldn't say I love it when my students are doing non-class related things. I don't, but I think my challenge as a teacher is to try and get them so that they don't want to be doing other things, so that they do want to be engaged during class time. So I almost view it as a reflection of my teaching to some extent.
I love that.
That's
Yeah,
a great
because if
point.
they are distracted and doing something else, there must be something, it's not obviously, sometimes they're just distractible people.
Yes, yes.
But going back to the idea of the creativity that we want to take out of the pandemic, that creativity is what generates that interest, right? We thought so much about student engagement in online settings. I think we have to go back and think about student engagement in this analog format again.
Yeah,
Just because someone is there physically does not mean that they are engaged.
exactly.
So true. So true.
There were just so many webinars about getting students to engage online because there is an extra hurdle there, of course. But honestly, finding creative ways to engage in person is an equally fun challenge.
I think so. And I think Lina's absolutely right when she brings up how we're stimulated by so much in the working world, the real world.
Yeah.
She's being realistic. Things are constantly vying for our attention.
Right? But back to Lina's role as academic director, we asked her about how she's evolved into her role of leader and mentor.
I think a lot of that goes back to what I said earlier about, being brave enough to say, I don't know. I think at first, when I stepped in, I thought that I really had to have the answers. I had to be there for my teaching team to make decisions, show them the way, be a end all be all resource for them. And now I view it in a different way. I've really been trying to shift away from me who has the answers and the ideas and the solutions to you all collectively as a group have ideas and solutions. So I'm trying to have them recognize that they all have collectively years and years and years upon years of experience teaching in the classroom. So, for example, we have monthly teacher meetings. So during those meetings, I'm shifting more away from me trying to teach a skill to them teaching each other skills. So recently, our theme was working with challenging student behavior. So I grouped the teachers into breakout rooms. This was a Zoom meeting. And they each had a scenario. For example, you have a student who falls asleep during class time. What do you do? So I had them talk to each other with their partner to come up with a solution and what steps they would take. And then I had them share that with the group as a whole. So, these are all real life scenarios that we encounter. Sleeping students, students who are late pretty much every class, students who come for the attendance and then they mysteriously disappear.
Oh gosh.
So
sneaky.
Yeah, very sneaky.
Do they think we don't notice?
Right. Right.
It's
If I don't
unreal.
look at you, then you won't see me, kind of I can't see you, you can't see me thing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Nice. So nice, some good brainstorming around
Yes,
these
brainstorming,
scenarios.
exactly. And they have more ideas and more possible solutions than if it was just me trying to do it for them. And more meaningful too. I don't have all the answers. So,
Yeah. And I think it builds rapport when you present yourself as a leader who's willing to collaborate, right? To facilitate discussion among peers rather than say, like, I'm Lina, I'm in charge now, and this is what we're doing, right? That just it doesn't sit well, understandably, for so many people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to be the kind
Right.
of leader
Yes.
you want to be.
Yes, right. I try to think about my experience as a teacher and put myself back in, okay, when I first started out teaching, who were my mentors? What were they like? That reflection, I think, is helpful too.
I love that part of her quest to become a better mentor is just to reflect on who have my mentors been? What did they do that I appreciated?
Yes, reflective practice in action.
Yeah.
And also that she really emphasizes this teacher-centered approach to being a mentor. It's the same as what we strive for in our classrooms. We want professional development, supporting teachers to be learner-driven, or in this case, teacher-driven.
Yeah. Arguably the most important principle of teacher training and mentorship right there. So to wrap this all up, we threw her a whopper of a question.
Last question for you, Lina, here. What do you think the future holds for IEPs?
That is such a good question. I am constantly asking myself that. And I think a lot of people in this field are as well. It's not a mystery that IEP enrollments are down as they have been in the past, and that enrollment is very volatile in its nature. International education is volatile. It's dependent on politics. It's dependent on economics. It's so many things. So for me, what is the future? I feel like it's so hard to say. What I hope to see is that more people around the world will have access so that it'll be easier to learn English, say, somebody who isn't upper class or doesn't have their family who can send them to the US and pay for their education here. My hope is that English education will become more accessible.
I think about, students who want to study in the US but come from countries where, it's impossible for them to get a visa.
Yes, exactly.
Like, so accessibility, I mean, it's about socioeconomic status, but it's also about, origin, country of origin. There are so many factors. And I think something beautiful that's come out of the pandemic is that we do have this ability to share resources far and wide if we try, if only we capitalize on that creativity that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Specifically, ESL, studying English in the States, how politically charged it is and how politics so greatly influences your ability to even come here. And then if you do get here, what happens next? What happens if you can't go home? Or what happens if going back home is not a good choice?
Whoa, there's a whole can of worms out here.
Yikes. Yeah, there's just so much more we could say on this topic. The intricacies of politics, of who is in the US and why, and whether they're here permanently or temporarily.
The privilege to choose to study in the US versus staying in the US as your only choice.
A conversation for another time.
Yes, big can of worms. So, listeners, we want to hear from you. Whether you're a teacher or administrator, how has your IEP or English language department evolved through the pandemic? What lessons have you taken out of the pandemic?
What kind of support and mentorship has been most helpful? What do you think is the future of English language teaching and IEPs more specifically?
You can join the conversation on our various social media accounts. Email us via our contact form at teacherthinkaloud.com or comment via Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. We welcome your reflections, questions, and ideas.
And also, as a reminder, we're still gathering listener contributions for our Friends of the Podcast episode, where we will integrate lots of different voices of our listeners from around the world.
If you haven't already, check out the questions we posted on social media. We want to know who you are, where you are, what you do, your strengths and challenges, and something unique about your teaching context.
You can contribute your answers by joining our Friends of the Podcast WhatsApp chat at bit.ly/pod_friends.
If WhatsApp isn't for you, you can also email us at teacherthinkaloud@gmail.com or write to us on social media. We're so eager to learn about you, members of this community of practice.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Teacher Think Aloud podcast. And until next time, happy teaching
and happy reflecting.